So thank you so much for having us on to talk about the vital role of rural America in winning back power for our democracy and specifically innovations in rural communications. Over 6 years, with your help, the Rural Democracy Initiative has built out a whole new field of rural civic action with 150 grantees that are driving remarkable wins in red territory. So, as you're looking anxiously towards 2026, know that in some of the most challenging corners of our states, we now have the strongest network of groups of any time in the past several decades who are ready to deliver democratic outcomes. One reason we focus on rural people is you just can't win without them. Next year, more than a dozen of the key House races are in rural places, as well as the additional Senate seats needed for the majority in places like Iowa, Alaska, Ohio, and Texas. So now, how do you win in these rural places? First, you choose your audiences carefully. Our polling shows that small towns are about 11 points more Democratic than remote rural areas. In fact, small towns were the one place Harris gained significant Democratic votes in 2024 battlegrounds. Additionally, rural people of color and young people are much more progressive, and rural voters are not as white as you might think they are. 1 in 4 rural residents are people of color, but they face some of the steepest barriers to voting. Our grantees help overcome these obstacles, like on native lands in Arizona and Wisconsin, many residences lack addresses, making it impossible to register to vote. Our grantees provide Google Plus codes for each household, so now they can vote and also access emergency services and get mail. In majority Black rural counties in North Carolina, local governments restrict polling places, so voters have to travel long distances and stand in long lines. Our grantees recruit helpful poll workers. They throw parties at the polls to create a safe environment and they support voter hotlines. And then young people of all demographics, they are the most undecided and also the least contacted. And the way to activate them is through trusted people in their community. So we created the Rural Youth Voter Fund, which has already granted about $15 million to groups registering voters on small town campuses, visiting workplaces and sporting events, and even brunch spots to engage young voters. And when rural votes swing, the whole state follows. Gains of 3 to 5% in rural areas will swing statewide outcomes. And this is exactly what happened in Wisconsin last spring. Rural and small town voters moved 5% towards Supreme Court Judge Crawford, accounting for 42.5% of her total statewide votes, which is more than Milwaukee and Dane County combined. And then last, we invest in high quality local candidates and deep local organizing year round. And so these local leaders mobilize their base, who they know personally, around practical issues that they touch in their everyday lives. And they won dozens of these mayor and council races this November in the toughest red towns. Probably the biggest barrier for rural people is disinformation. It's so potent in rural places where the local news is dwindling and people get their information from digital platforms where they are relentlessly targeted by the right. So our response is train our grantees to be skilled disinformation interrupters and then serve up plenty of high quality information. We use local messengers speaking in their own voice because the right messenger is much more important than what you even say. And then we take advantage of all the existing media like small town papers and rural radio and even yard signs and billboards where people can see their neighbors' support. Ruralorganizing.org placed 62,000 rural yard signs in 2024. And then we use messages that connect to rural culture. We incubated the winning jobs narrative that centers lower costs and higher wages and makes working people the heroes of the story.
Mhm.
And then the last thing is that we're investing in innovative communications models, like the one you're going to hear about today, because the age of advertising and mainstream news for talking to voters is over. The people that we need to reach now, they get their news woven in with their sports and their parenting and their music shows and on local sites that are delivered by community members that they're entrusted long-term relationships with. So we're especially excited about this new network of hyper-local pages and content that Real Voices Media is developing in partnership with our grantees. Multiple experiments that we've done show you get greater engagement and action from audience that are within a 30-mile radius of the source of content, and that the quality of your connection is paramount. And so essentially, 10 local sites that each reach 10,000 people every week is more valuable than one site that reaches 100,000 people sporadically. So let's go ahead and jump into the Real Voices Media Rural Project, starting with Heather Holdridge, its managing director.
Thank you, Sarah, and it's good to be with you all. And Sarah actually teed up my first slide perfectly, which is what is the space that we find voters in now? And what you're looking at is that our existence, Real Voices Media, is to counter this ecosystem that the right wing has built up. They have really been doing this over the past decade. And now what we've got is a 24/7 network that is constantly pumping misinformation, disinformation, and kind of emotional content that overwhelms facts in the world. And as Sarah so aptly noted, the way that that's showing up is not just through places like Fox News. It's actually showing up in non-political programming like podcasts, memes, lifestyle content, and they sprinkle the sort of conservative or authoritarian values in the middle of that. So it sort of feeds its way over time into people's consciousness. And by the time we hit September of an election year, people's perspectives have shifted dramatically on what it is that they are, how they view and respond to information. So here's a little bit more about our model. We are an always on local network. As Esther said in her opening, our network is about 3.9 million people, largely on Facebook. We have been slowly growing into spaces in Instagram and some of the more video-centered platforms like TikTok and YouTube. But these are 24/7 local networks. They are not advertising based. They are largely organic and they are largely local. So we use these local pages on Facebook to build trust because they are run by local community managers who are representative of the communities that they are overseeing and managing in those spaces. And because they are smaller and more localized, they're able to kind of get around and penetrate some of the right-wing algorithms that tend to dominate these larger spaces that the conservatives are using to promote their messaging. Importantly, because we have these localized pages that are a nice mix of people whose affinities are not political, we are often able to use them to both surface disinformation when it first emerges, and increasingly we are trying to build content strategies around inoculation so that we are anticipating what that disinformation might be, and we are countering it before voters are exposed to it, thereby decreasing its relevance and its impact for folks. And the last piece is because these are local, authentic voices, we are able to build cultural and narrative power over time. This is a day-by-day process whereby people are getting value from engaging with these communities where they trust what is being presented to them and the conversations that we're able to facilitate and foster. There we go. So this is just a really brief map that shows where our strengths and where we have the size of our network. You can see the red circles are where we have the largest share, Wisconsin, Michigan, and the blue circles where we have a pretty decent concentration. Obviously, there are large swaths of rural folks and rural communities in each of these states. And in all cases, we have built out smaller communities that represent really different parts of each state because, as we all know, different rural communities have different characters, different flavors, different things that they are interested in and focused on based on where they live. Sometimes we get asked questions about why we're centered on Facebook. We started in 2019, and of the 500 pages that we're certainly running, and we're running probably about 30% of those at the height of elections. The reason is because people are on Facebook. It is a place where people still come to connect. As you can see on the left, 72% of likely voters in a June 2025 survey, they are using Facebook to get information about what's going on. And the chart on the right is super interesting to me because I think one of the things that remains super relevant and useful about Facebook is it's a nice mix of people ideologically. So you have a combination of folks who are more Republican leaning, along with Democrats and independents. Those are the communities, when we build them in a non-political way, we're able to foster interesting conversations around things like where they're from, their family, their state, their identity about themselves, and that's how we are able to connect and build trust over time. I'm going to go through this really quickly, but you can see just kind of the flavor of some of the pages that we have across the network. Some of them are, so we can see in the bottom left, Proudly Served, that's a veterans page. Most of these, though, are very geographically specific and intended to connect people within states based on where they live and what their identity is. And these are some of our more network of pages that are based on pride of place. And of course, as Sarah has been talking about, the rural spaces in which the RDI is doing their organizing, these are perfect spaces for us to be engaging and building community and sharing information with people that they find useful and then can engage with each other on the pages. Here's a few very brief examples. This is about you're seeing here kind of the content that's the 80%. This is like the simple elbow grease. This is the day-to-day pick-me-up content. Maybe it gives you a little chuckle. Maybe it lifts you up a little bit. Some of this is intended to be funny, and some of it's maybe meant to just provide a little bit of emotional support. And this is kind of the bread and butter of what connects our communities with each other. I think I lost a slide here. I lost a slide where I was going to show you some other content here, but let me talk through a little bit of one of our projects in 2024 that was called Boomtown. And what we did there was, this is the other 20% of our content, where what we shared there was we were taking Biden administration policies and we broke them down into individual projects where we could see what was the economic impact of jobs that were being created locally in communities over time, so that folks living in rural areas weren't seeing highlights about a $4 billion project, but rather they were seeing information about a $10 million project that was being built in their community, and then lifting up local voices talking about how that was benefiting them. And you can see here the engagement rates are 10%, which is about 13 times the average engagement rate of content in the Facebook network for rural communities. And this just shows how the over indexing of the performance of content that was localized based on whether it was a graphic or an article or video. The other project I wanted to lift up that is relevant for our local communities and rural folks was called Factory Towns. And here's where you can see some images of some of the local voices that we were lifting up and how some of these programs were locally impacting them. So in this case, we interviewed union workers, some trainers for folks who were doing infrastructure projects in Western Pennsylvania. And so we interviewed them where they were talking about all of the workers that they needed to hire so they were going to get a living wage and stay in their communities. And then we were interviewing the union workers who were saying, now I can stay in the community I grew up in. I thought I was going to have to leave my state in order to, earn enough money to start raising a family and build my own life. And we were able to interview them and then push that out in localized channels. One of the things that was said earlier in this conversation was the importance of kind of talking about what's happening within that 30-mile radius. That's what our localized pages are intended to do, and you can see this reflected in how the content performs in these projects. The last thing I wanted to lift up is just a snapshot of how the conversations happen. So this was a page in Michigan for working class folks. And the Volkswagen collective bargaining vote that happened about a year and a half ago, and we posted that in the Working Michigan page. You see an engagement rate there of 21%. They engage with that content rate of 21%, and you can see all of those comments in there. We are lifting up opportunities for hope and where people can see a future where working people are able to get a living wage, stay in their communities, and raise their families. And that's what we're excited to work with the RDI team on in 2026 on their project. And I'm going to kick it over to Richard.
Thanks so much, Heather. And nice to digitally connect with everybody today. My name is Richard Trent. I'm the executive director for Main Street Alliance, Main Street Action Fund, Main Street Action PAC. A lot of jobs. Main Street Alliance, Main Street Action, got its start during the Affordable Care Act days. So really like 2008, 2009, organizing small business owners who were frankly tired of being used as political props while their healthcare costs kept rising. So kind of full circle moment. The truth is that for decades, the GOP has branded themselves as being the party of Main Street while passing policies that actually hollow out local economies. And unfortunately, Democrats haven't really made a sustained play for this vote. All right. And so a lot of our C4 work and PAC work focuses kind of on that specific dynamic. How do we activate some of these small business validators as credible messengers for progressive policies at the local level? I mean, from the beginning, we knew we learned something crucial, which is that small business owners are, yes, credible, authentic messengers, but they're really underutilized validators. And this is key because they sit at the intersection of affordability, healthcare, childcare, wages, prices, and they're deeply, deeply trusted across ideological lines. Um, we feel like that insight has translated into real policy wins. So our members were key validators, obviously, in the Affordable Care Act days, in passing paid leave in Minnesota in 2023. We have been validators for unions and laborers, sort of capital, validating a lot of labor's policies, whether that's living wage in different places. During President Biden's administration, we made the case directly to him, connecting him with our members around stabilization dollars and their American Rescue Plan Act. We know that our work and our organizing is translated to advocacy and policy impact. More recently, it started to translate into electoral impact. So small business validators in our network helped flip key legislative seats in Wisconsin in 2024. This was kind of our proving grounds as a C4 operation, where we powered 6 roundtables across and politically consequential districts, endorsed some of the members that ran and won were actually MSA members and small business owners or former small business owners. And we felt like we had a thesis worth running with. That same model, helped carry some of the narrative with the Caitlin Dray special election in Iowa, where we were involved, and also helped drive some of our work in Virginia with this off year, the legislative wins there. So this is a model that's begun to scale nationally. We've engaged 14,000 small business owners across testimony and roundtables and legal actions and petitions this year. We had 50 million impressions across digital and earned media, all centered on tariffs, affordability, healthcare, the cost of daily life. And our priority states are all places where affordability pressures are unbelievably acute. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Virginia, Michigan, North Carolina, and Iowa, where we are growing unbelievably fast and where, we don't think it's a coincidence that one of the most sluggish economies in America, Iowa, also happens to be one of the sickest places in America with record rates of cancer because of some of the farm runoff and all these different things. That's not a coincidence. And we need farmers who are small business owners and our small business owners in places like that speaking up. And it's why we're excited to partner with Real Voices Media because these Facebook pages are they're the town square in rural and small town America. And it allows us to place authentic Main Street voices directly into these trusted ecosystems and turn that credibility into reach and organizing power. I'll just close with this. My mom, I do this work because my parents were small business owners. My mom and my dad ran a catering company when I was 6 months, 8 months old. My father was killed when I was very young. My mom continued to run the catering business. When she passed, she ultimately passed when I was in high school. There were people at her funeral who remember her catering. These were clients of hers that she wowed obviously with their food and with their cooking. That sort of trust, right? You don't get that when DC technocrats parachute into these places and try to organize. You get that from small business owners who've got real skin in the game, who've been in these places for many, many years, who aren't going to leave the day after an election, who didn't show up the day before the election. These are the validators that we need to tap into. And in the same way that the GOP has forever leveraged things like faith networks or talk radio to be evergreen organizing infrastructure for that party, that's what small business can be for Democrats. And we see that, and we're actively building it out. And we hope you can be thought partners in all of that, and super grateful for the opportunity to share some of our work today.